Once upon a time, in a faraway land called Ubero, there was a prince named Ekin. He was not the kind of prince people feared. He was kind, quiet, and gentle. He liked to read books and watch birds fly in the sky. He loved listening to stories from old men and playing the flute late at night when the palace was asleep. He hated shouting. He hated fighting. But most of all, he hated blood. That was his biggest problem. Because Ubero was not a kind place. It was a kingdom full of warriors, sharp swords, and louder voices. People respected strength more than wisdom. They loved fire more than peace. And the moment Prince Ekin's father died, the palace changed. The smiles grew thinner. The whispers behind his back grew louder. He's too soft to rule. How can a boy who cries for servants lead an army? Even the palace dogs don't fear him. These were the things people said. He heard them. He just pretended he didn't. One evening, Ekin sat by the royal window, looking out at the red hills in the distance. His mother, Queen Dowager Omalicha, walked in quietly. Her steps were light, but her voice was never soft. "You need to act now," she said, without greeting him. Ekin turned to her. "Act how?" "Before they act first," she replied. She walked over and poured herself a drink. She didn't sit. She liked standing above everyone. Even her own son. "The council is divided. Half of them want you gone. Your uncle Obiajalu is stirring trouble in the east. And the guards? Some of them have been meeting in secret." Ekin sighed. "I know. I don't want to rule like father did. Always shouting. Always killing." His mother gave a cold laugh. "You think ruling is a storybook, Ekin? You want them to love you? Love is not what holds power together. Fear does. Respect does. And you have neither." There was silence. The kind that fills a room with heat. Finally, she dropped the words that would change his life. "You need to marry." Ekin blinked. "What?" "You need someone by your side who makes people afraid to challenge you," she said. "Not a princess. Not a dancer. A warrior." Ekin's heart dropped. "You want me to marry a fighter?" "Yes," she said, sipping from her cup. "You need to make a statement. Show the people you're not as soft as they think. That you're not alone." He stood up slowly. "That's not what marriage is for." She cut him off. "Power doesn't care about love, Ekin. Power only cares about control. You marry someone strong, someone who can crush bones with her hands, and suddenly, no one dares speak against you." Ekin said nothing. That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked alone in the garden, hands behind his back. Crickets sang in the bushes. Moonlight danced on the palace stones. He tried to imagine himself beside a big, strong warrior woman. Tried to picture what the people would say. Tried to imagine what it would feel like to walk into court and not hear the whispers. He didn't want it. But maybe he needed it. 3 days later, the search began. In a wide dusty field just outside Ubero, a crowd had gathered. Drums beat loudly. Sweat ran down foreheads. Dust rose with every step. Prince Ekin sat under a red canopy, beside his mother. He wore a golden robe, but his face looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Before him, women from every corner of Ubero came forward to show their strength. Some lifted heavy stones. Others broke clay pots with their fists. One even fought 2 men and won. The crowd cheered. The prince tried to smile. Then she walked in. Tall, dark, muscular, silent. Her name was Ajay. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't wear jewelry like the others. She wore a simple brown wrapper tied tightly around her waist, and a cloth wrapped across her chest. Her arms looked like they could crush trees. Her face looked like it hadn't smiled in years. The crowd went silent as she stepped forward. "She wrestled a wild boar last year," someone whispered. "She once carried her brother on her back for 3 days without stopping," another said. The prince stared at her. Something about her presence pulled all the air from the field. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was heavier than any shout. Ajay stepped into the circle. A guard walked in to fight her. It ended in 5 seconds. One move. One throw. The guard hit the ground like a sack of yam. The crowd gasped. The second guard came in. She dodged, grabbed his leg, slammed him on the ground. The third guard didn't even get the chance to swing. She picked him up and dropped him like he was nothing. The dust settled. The field grew quiet again. Prince Ekin swallowed hard. His mother leaned in. She's the one. He nodded slowly. Yes, she is. As the crowd still roared from Ajay's performance, Prince Ekin stepped down from the royal canopy. The dust swirled around his feet as he made his way toward her. The guards tried to follow, but he raised a hand. Let me speak with her alone, he said quietly. Ajay stood in the middle of the field, arms crossed, chest rising and falling with slow breaths. She didn't move when he stopped in front of her. You fought well, Ekin said. I know, she replied without blinking. He nodded slowly. I'm not here just to praise you. I need to ask you something. She tilted her head slightly. Go on. He took a deep breath. The kingdom is changing. People are testing me, doubting me. I need someone who can stand beside me, someone no one would dare question. She raised an eyebrow. You want a guard? No. I want a wife, he said, voice calm but firm. Ajay let out a short laugh. A wife? Me? You want to dress me up in beads and silk, sit me beside you like a shiny trophy, am I Lord Prince? Ekin looked her in the eyes. I don't want a trophy. I want someone with fire in her blood. Someone who can walk beside me, not behind me. Someone who can help me hold this kingdom. She stepped closer, her voice sharper. And when I start to lead louder than you, Prince, will you still want me beside you? He hesitated for a second, then said, if you lead with me, yes. If you try to lead over me, I'll fight back. There was a pause. Ajay smirked. At least you have some teeth. Then she leaned closer, so close he could feel her breath. You want me to be your wife, my Lord Prince? Yes, I do, Prince Ekin replied. As my Lord Prince commands, Ajay said as she bowed and smirked. She then continued, I will do as you say. I will be your shield and sword, and your lover if you please. But in return you will do something for me when the time comes. What is that? Prince Ekin asked desperately. You will know when the time comes, she replied him. And without waiting for his reply, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the dust. A week later, the wedding was held. There was no dancing. There was no joy. The people didn't laugh or sing like they used to. Instead, they watched in silence. Curious. Confused. Some even whispered insults. Is that a woman or a soldier? She looks like she'll eat him for breakfast. The prince has married a monster. But Ekin didn't care. He walked beside her through the palace walkway. He wore his crown. She wore none. Her back was straight, her steps strong. When they reached the royal chamber after the ceremony, she closed the door behind them. He turned to speak, to maybe ask if she was okay, if she was nervous. She stepped close. Her voice was deep and low. You married me for strength, my prince, she said. I will give you strength. But it has a price. Ekin looked into her eyes. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what she meant. But he nodded anyway. Then she turned her back and lay on the cold mat in the corner. She didn't sleep beside him. Days passed. At first, everything was quiet. She followed him everywhere like a shadow. Guards stood taller when she passed. Even the council began to sit straighter during meetings. Ekin noticed that the whispers had reduced. People bowed faster. Doors opened before he knocked. He felt safe. But something else was happening. During a court session, a nobleman laughed loudly when Ekin made a suggestion. Ajay stepped forward and stood behind the man's chair. Just stood. Said nothing. The man's voice faded. He didn't laugh again. Another day, a guard tried to open the prince's chamber door without knocking. Ajay threw him down the stairs. The prince rushed out. That was too much. She looked him dead in the eye. He forgot his place. He was just a boy. And I'm your shield, she said. Don't forget that. One night, the prince sat alone in the dining hall, eating slowly. Ijay walked in. She had just returned from training with the guards. He looked at her. You've taken control of their training. She didn't deny it. They listened to me, she said. I didn't ask them to, he replied. She sat across from him. Do you want them to fear you, or laugh at you? I want peace. Then let me do what I do. They stared at each other across the table. For a moment, the silence returned. Then she stood up and walked out without another word. Back in his room, Ekin sat by the window again, watching the red hills. He could feel something shifting. The silence in the palace was not the same anymore. It wasn't calm. It was heavy. Something was growing beneath it. And Ekin was starting to wonder, who really wore the crown now? The wind in Ubro started to feel different. It didn't blow gently anymore. It pressed against the palace walls like it wanted to say something, like it was warning the prince. But Ekin, still staring out from his royal window, tried to ignore it. Since the wedding, the palace had changed. At first, people had laughed. Behind his back. In the halls. Even in the market square. They laughed at the way Ajay walked like a soldier beside him. At how her arms looked stronger than his guards. At how her eyes never smiled, even at celebrations. But weeks passed, and the laughter died down. Something else replaced it. Something quiet and cold. Fear. It started during a council meeting. 10 noblemen sat around a long wooden table. They spoke about taxes and food shortages and soldiers at the border. Ekin listened carefully, nodding. He was about to speak when Councillor Obinna raised a concern about the prince's decision to send food to the northern villages. Ekin opened his mouth to reply, but didn't get the chance. Ijay leaned forward from where she stood behind him and spoke first. That food won't last the journey, she said, cutting through the silence like a knife. It's better we send weapons instead. Those villages need protection, not yams. The council room went quiet. Councillor Obinna blinked. With respect, my lady, you do not have the floor. She stared at him. I have a voice, and I will use it when foolish words fill the air. Ekin gently turned toward her. Ijay. She didn't step back. She didn't sit down. She just crossed her arms and looked straight at Obinna. If we keep feeding weak villages, they will never defend themselves. They'll depend on us until they collapse, and take the kingdom with them. Councillor Idu, an older man with grey hair and a smooth voice, spoke up. Perhaps she has a point. Ekin looked at Idu. That was the first time he had ever supported anyone but the prince. The prince swallowed hard. We'll discuss it again tomorrow. Ijay smirked. The meeting ended. But that small moment, the way she spoke over him, stayed in his mind all night. A few days later, things got worse. In the training yard, Ekin noticed a large crowd of soldiers cheering. He walked over, expecting a drill session led by Captain Musa. But it wasn't Musa shouting orders. It was Ijay. She stood in the middle of the yard, her voice loud and sharp. Again, she yelled. That spear was too slow. You fight like chickens. The men ran, lifted, shouted, and obeyed her as if she were already their commander. Ekin walked up to Musa, confused. Why is she leading the drills? He asked. Musa, a tall and quiet man with battle scars on his cheek, looked down. She said she wanted to train us, he said. She didn't ask. She told us. Ekin frowned. And you listened. Musa didn't meet his eyes. She fights better than any of us. And some of the men say they trust her more. The prince turned, watching Ijay grab a sword from one soldier and show him how to strike properly. The other guards clapped. It was happening. Slowly, without warning, she was taking over. That night, Ekin sat in the dining room with his mother. She sipped palm wine quietly. He picked at his food. She's changing everything, he said. Didn't you ask her to? Omalicha replied without looking up. I asked for help, not control. His mother set her cup down. Then control her. How? She already has more of the guards listening to her than me. Then take something from her. Something important. Ekin looked at her, confused. You're the king, she said. Act like it before you become her shadow. But he didn't act. He watched. And that was the problem. The very next morning, something new appeared. A scroll, rolled neatly and stamped with the royal seal, was delivered to every council member. It was titled, Royal Enforcer Declaration. It said that Ajay had been appointed as Royal Enforcer of the Crown, giving her the right to lead the palace guards, make decisions in matters of security, and speak in court meetings. The scroll was signed by Ekin. Except, he never signed it. He stormed into the council chamber, holding the paper. I didn't approve this, he shouted. Councillor Idu stood up, calm as ever. With respect, Your Highness, we assumed it came from you. The seal is royal. Ekin stared at him. Where did this come from? Idu smiled. Ajay brought it. She said you wanted it delivered early. That night, Ekin confronted her. They stood face to face in the private chamber. You forged my seal, he said, his voice shaking. She leaned against the wall, arms folded. I gave the people what they already wanted, she said. I never gave you that title. You're too slow, Ekin. While you think, I act. That's the difference between a dreamer and a ruler. His fists tightened. You're walking too close to the edge. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You married a lioness. Now you're scared of her claws. Ekin stepped back. I'm warning you. She cut him off. You can keep warning me. I'll keep protecting the throne. And just like that, she walked past him and left the room. Days turned into weeks. The guards started saluting her before him. Servants called her Queen Ajay behind closed doors. Some even said it out loud, testing the waters, seeing if anyone would stop them. No one did. Ekin knew he needed someone to talk to. Someone who still remembered who he was before this madness began. He called for General Okazi. General Okazi was an old war veteran. Thick-bearded, tall, and strong, even in his 50s. He had served the late king. He had scars across his back from a war in the east, and he still wore his armor like it was part of his skin. Most importantly, he never bowed to fear. The prince met him in the candlelit study, late at night. She's taking over, Ekin said. Okazi didn't blink. I've seen it. She's louder than me in court. The guards follow her. Even Idu is on her side. Okazi looked him straight in the eye. She's building something. Ekin frowned. What do you mean? I've been watching her, he said. She sneaks out of the palace before sunrise. Goes into the forest. Sometimes she's with 10 men. Sometimes with 50. Where is she going? There's an abandoned watchpost in the hills. It was used during the border wars. She's fixing it up. Bringing weapons. Training men. Ekin's heart dropped. She's building a private army. Okazi nodded. If she's not already finished. The prince sat on the edge of his bed that night, unable to sleep. He thought about the first time he saw her, standing tall in the dust, silent but powerful. He remembered how he had walked toward her, chosen her. And now, she was walking away from him, dragging his crown along with her. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, before court began, he stepped into the great hall and stood before Ajay. She was already in her place beside the throne, dressed in warrior robes, calm as always. We need to talk, he said. She raised an eyebrow. No. Now. They walked together to the empty strategy room. Ekin closed the door. I know about the training grounds in the forest, he said. She looked at him, amused. Oh. You're forming your own army. They're loyal to the crown. No, they're loyal to you. She walked past him, fingers brushing the table edge. You're just afraid because they listen when I speak. I'm afraid because you've started acting like the ruler when you're not. She turned sharply. Then act like one. The room went quiet. She stepped close, her voice dropping. You brought me here because you wanted fear, power, strength. I gave you all. And now you blame me for doing it too well. I never asked for a queen who steals in the dark. Ijay smiled coldly. Then you shouldn't have married a lioness. And with that, she walked out, leaving the door wide open behind her. That evening, General Okazi was found unconscious in his chambers. He had vomited blood. A servant found a small empty bottle under his bed. They called the palace doctor. Poison, the doctor said. Iken stood over the general's pale body, his hands shaking. Okazi survived, barely, but he couldn't speak. His mouth was dry. His eyes were wide. And he was afraid. For the first time in years, the great warrior looked like a dying child. The prince turned to the doctor. Will he live? I don't know, the doctor said. But someone wanted him quiet. Iken walked through the palace halls that night with no guards, no crown, and no hope. The shadows along the walls whispered, Queen Ijay, Queen Ijay, Queen Ijay. He had brought her into the palace with his own hands. Now she stood taller than the throne itself. And he had no idea how to stop her. The palace was no longer a home. It was a quiet prison with golden doors. Prince Iken moved through it like a ghost. Guards barely looked at him. Servants lowered their eyes. The throne felt cold when he sat on it. He was king, but he didn't feel like one. General Okazi still lay in his chamber, barely breathing. He could not speak. His eyes stayed open, but empty. The poison had taken his voice. And the message was clear. Speak against Ijay, and you'll be silenced. Iken didn't cry. He just sat beside Okazi each evening, holding the old man's hand, hoping for something, anything, to change. But deep in his heart, fear had started growing. Not of war, not of the rebels at the border, but of her. Meanwhile, inside the palace kitchen, Adeobi watched everything. She wore a simple maid's cloth now, her once bright gowns gone. Her hair, which used to be braided and full, was now wrapped in a brown scarf. No one paid her any attention anymore. And that was exactly what she wanted. Adeobi had grown up in the palace. Her mother had been a healer, her father a royal cook. She knew the walls better than anyone, knew which doors creaked, which guards fell asleep, and which passageways led to where. And she also knew Ijay was hiding something. It all started 2 nights after General Okazi was poisoned. Adeobi was sweeping the hallway near Ijay's chamber when she heard something. Not the usual soldier talk. Not footsteps. It was a whisper. A different language. One she had only heard once before. Years ago, when she was just a child, a group of rebels had attacked a nearby village. Her father had helped cook for the king's army, and Adeobi had followed him. The rebels spoke fast, angry words in a tongue that wasn't common. Her father called them the Dara Brotherhood, a group that believed the throne of Ubaro had been stolen from their bloodline hundreds of years ago. The king at that time had crushed the Dara. The survivors were banished. Their language was banned. But now, Adeobi was hearing it again. She dropped her broom. Quickly, she tiptoed closer, careful not to make a sound. She pressed her ear to the wooden door. I will go at nightfall, a man's voice said in the Dara tongue. The others are waiting in the hills. Then Ijay's voice followed. Take this. Burn the map when you're done. Adeobi's heart beat faster. There was someone inside Ijay's room. Someone she was giving orders to. And they were speaking in the rebel language. Adeobi rushed away before they noticed her. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on her bed in the maid's quarters, clutching a piece of cloth in her hands, trying to think. Who was he? She whispered to herself. She had only caught a small glimpse of the man when he stepped out hours later. He was slim, dark-skinned, and quiet. He wore royal clothes like a palace guest. He walked with pride, but kept his head down. She had heard people call him Uzo, Ijay's cousin. Or so they said. But Adeobi had a feeling. He was much more than that. The next day, Adeobi followed him. She kept her distance as Uzo walked through the garden, past the guard posts, and into the back trail that led into the forest. He didn't look back once. He moved like someone who had done this many times. Adeobi knew the back trail well. It was once used by traders, now forgotten by most. But Uzo walked it like he owned it. After an hour, he met two men near the base of the hills. They didn't wear royal clothes. They had rough faces, long beards, and daggers tied to their sides. They knelt before Uzo. Adeobi's hand covered her mouth. She crouched low behind the trees. Then, one of them said, "We await your word, Commander." Uzo nodded. "Soon, the throne will fall. She has cleared the path." They gave him a bag. He gave them a scroll. Then they disappeared into the trees again. Adeobi waited for Uzo to return to the palace before she moved. Her legs were shaking. Ije had brought a rebel into the palace. And now, they were building something that could destroy Ubero. That night, Adeobi made a decision. She would tell the prince. She didn't care if she got caught. She didn't care if they laughed at her. She had to speak. She waited until the moon was high and the palace quiet. Then she slipped through the servant hallway and climbed the stairs toward the prince's chamber. But before she could knock, strong hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed, but no sound came out. A cloth was pushed over her mouth. Everything went dark. When Adeobi opened her eyes again, she was lying on the cold floor. Her arms ached. Her face throbbed. She looked around. Stone walls. Torches on the wall. A lion carving on the door. It was Ije's chamber. Ije stood above her, dressed in dark red. Her eyes were calm, but sharp like a blade. "You've been following people," Ije said quietly. Adeobi didn't reply. "You've seen things you shouldn't see." Still, silence. Ije bent down. Her voice dropped low. "Do not mistake kindness for weakness. I allowed you to stay in this palace out of respect. But now, you've overstepped." Adeobi whispered, "He deserves to know." Ije's eyes didn't blink. "He will know. When it's time." She nodded toward the guards. "Take her to the healer. Make sure she walks out." The guards lifted Adeobi roughly and dragged her away. When Adeobi returned to the maid's quarters the next morning, her lips were swollen. Her left eye was red. She walked slowly, holding her side. Other maids asked questions. She said nothing. When she saw the prince later that day in the hallway, she tried to get close. But she didn't speak. She just lowered her head and walked away. Ikon noticed her face. His heart stopped. That night, he asked a servant to bring her to his chamber. But the servant returned alone. "She said she is sick," he reported. The prince stared at the wall for a long time. Something was wrong. Later that week, he sat across from his mother in the garden. Queen Dowager Omalicha wore a black shawl over her shoulders. Her hair was tied neatly. She stared at the sky like it held secrets. "She's taken everything," Ikon said. "Even Adeobi is afraid to speak." Omalicha didn't respond. She controls the guards, the council, the people. And now there's a man living in her chamber who gives her scrolls and walks in and out of the palace like he owns it. Omalicha finally turned to him. "Then leave." Ikon blinked. "What?" "Let her take the throne." "You want me to run?" She shook her head. "I want you to live. But if I leave, it's over. She wins." Omalicha stood up. "No." She rises. "And when she's too high to see the ground, we strike. She will be blind with power. That is when she'll fall." Ikon clenched his fists. "I never wanted a war." "No king ever does," she said softly. "But war finds the weak. And right now, you're the weakest man in the palace." He looked away. And in that moment, he understood something. He had lost more than power. He had lost himself. The next morning, Uzo stood beside Ije in the war room. A large map of Ubro lay on the table. Red pins were marked across villages. Black arrows showed movement. Circles surrounded the palace. "They are ready," Uzo said. "And the border soldiers?" Ije asked. "Half of them have been replaced." Quietly. "No one suspects a thing." She nodded slowly. "And the prince?" Uzo smirked. Still thinking. Still weak. Ijay picked up a gold pin and stuck it in the center of the map, on the royal throne. Soon, she whispered. That same day, Prince Ekin stood by the window again. The red hills looked farther than ever. He turned as a servant entered. She has summoned the council, the servant said. Ekin asked, for what? She didn't say. The servant left. Ekin looked around his chamber. Then at the sword resting by the wall. He hadn't touched it in months. Now, he lifted it, held it in both hands. And for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. The royal courtyard was silent, but the air felt heavy like it was holding its breath. Prince Ekin stood at the center, staring at the main gate as it opened slowly. The drums started, a loud, steady rhythm that echoed through the palace walls. Then he saw them. Marching in, one after another, were soldiers unlike any he had ever seen. Their skin was painted with red stripes. Their eyes were cold. Their uniforms were black with red shoulder cloths. Every step they took shook the ground beneath them. They didn't look around. They didn't speak. They moved as one. At the front, with a long spear and a sword at her waist, was Ijay. Her face was painted too. A single line ran from her forehead down to her chin. Blood red. She raised her hand, and the soldiers stopped. Then she turned to the gathered nobles and guards. These are the red vultures, she said loud and clear. From today, they will protect Ubero. They will guard the palace. They will watch the gates. And they will answer only to me. The nobles looked at each other. Some bowed their heads in silence. Others stood frozen. Prince Ekin took a slow step forward. You created a private army, he said softly. Ijay turned toward him. No, I created a wall. One that can't be shaken. You gave them power that was never yours to give. She smiled. You gave me that power the moment you asked me to protect you. I'm still doing that. They don't serve the kingdom. They serve you. She stepped close, just enough for him to hear her whisper. They serve the future. Then she turned and walked past him, her red vultures following behind like shadows. That night, the palace changed. The old guards, the ones who had served for years, were replaced. Some were sent away to far-off posts. Others simply vanished. Where is Captain Musa? One servant asked. No one knew. Did you see Lieutenant Jide today? He didn't report for duty. One by one, those who were loyal to Prince Ekin disappeared. Some left quietly. Others were never seen again. At night, screams could be heard from deep within the palace walls. No one talked about them in the morning. The palace cook stopped whistling. The stable boys moved in silence. The women who used to gossip near the laundry room now avoided each other's eyes. Fear had taken over. And Ijay sat proudly in the court, beside the throne, like she had always belonged there. Prince Ekin watched it all. He said nothing. But inside him, something had changed. He was no longer afraid of her. He was angry. He started meetings secretly, quietly, always in different places. Never the same time twice. The first to return was Adeobi. Her bruises had healed, but her eyes were sharper. She wore a black scarf now, always tied low, like a reminder of what had been done to her. She said little. But when she spoke, her words carried weight. Then came General Okazi. He had recovered slowly, kept in hiding in a small hut outside the palace. His voice was weaker, but his spirit was still strong. He came walking with a cane, but his eyes burned with fire. It's time, he told Ekin. You don't fight lions with prayers. You fight them with teeth. Finally, two new faces joined the prince's circle. They were foreign allies. Zubair and Kato, two brothers from the kingdom of Omena, far across the desert. Zubair was the older one, quiet, bald, with eyes that missed nothing. He used to work as a royal advisor for kings in other lands but had left after a failed uprising. Kato was younger, lean, with long arms and a sharp tongue. He had once led an army that protected trade routes between empires. Both had been forced to flee their home after their cousin tried to kill them. They owed the prince nothing. But they hated dictators. And they saw one in Ajay. Your palace smells like smoke, Zubair said at their first meeting. Then help me before it burns down, Ekin replied. They met in the royal library at night, in a hidden room behind the bookshelves. Only 5 of them knew about it: Ekin, Adeobi, Okazi, Zubair, and Kato. They sat around a table with a hand-drawn map of the palace and forest. She keeps her strongest guards near the east wing, Adeobi whispered. That's where Uzo stays. She moves her red vultures like a game, said Kato. Always rotating shifts. Always watching the main exits. We can still take the northern wall, said Okazi. There's a passage under the old well. No red vultures go near it. Why not? Ekin asked. Superstition, Adeobi said. They think it's cursed. The plan was forming. But something felt wrong. Every time they made a move, no matter how careful, it was like Ajay already knew. They scheduled a secret weapon drop near the garden. It disappeared. They called for old guards to return quietly. The message never reached them. Even when Ekin tried to smuggle a letter to a nearby chief asking for help, the messenger vanished. It didn't make sense. Until one evening, Kato threw down his cup in anger. She's always one step ahead. Always. We plan, and she breaks it before we start. There's a rat, Zubair said calmly. Someone is feeding her our plans. Adeobi looked around the room. But who? Then, the silence came. A deep silence. The kind that wraps around you when a truth is hiding nearby. Ekin looked down at the map. Then up at the ceiling. Then at the door. Only one person knew everything. Every word he had spoken. Every fear he had shared. Every plan they had made. His mother, Queen Dowager Omalicha. That night, he went to her chamber. She was seated by the fire, warming her hands. Her hair was braided neatly. Her gold rings sparkled in the firelight. Come in, my son, she said without turning. Ekin stood in the doorway. You knew. She smiled gently. I know many things. You told her, he said. You told her everything we planned. She looked at him now. Her face calm. Her eyes soft. I told her nothing she didn't already know. He stepped inside. Why? Because you're not ready, she said. You still think ruling is about kindness. About being liked. It's not. She's turning Ubro into her own kingdom. Omalicha nodded. And when she's finished, she will forget to look down. She will forget where she started. And that is when we strike. I'm not waiting anymore, Ekin said. I will fight her now. Omalicha stood slowly. And lose everything. I'd rather die trying than live as her shadow. She walked to him and placed her hand on his cheek. I love you, my son. But you're too soft. That's why I told her. Ekin stepped back, heart pounding. I trusted you. Then learn from your mistake, she whispered. And become the king this throne needs. He left without another word. The next day, Ajay stood before the council. Prince Ekin was not present. I will be taking full control of border security, she announced. All messengers must pass through my table before leaving the palace. The nobles said nothing. She walked to the throne and sat beside it. Her fingers tapped slowly on the armrest. Uzo stood behind her, smiling quietly. In the secret room, Ekin sat with Adeobi, Okazi, Zubair, and Kato. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. We move in 2 nights, he said. Okazi nodded. How many men? Just us. Adeobi leaned forward. What do we do first? We go through the old well, Ekin said. We reach the east wing. We get Uzo. We take him alive. And we use him to break Ajay's grip. And if we don't make it out? Kato asked. Ekin looked around. Then we make sure she never forgets we were here. The others nodded. That night, Ubro slept under a heavy sky. And somewhere deep in the palace, a prince who had once been afraid picked up his sword. Not as a shield, but as a weapon. The palace court was packed that morning. Everyone was there, the nobles in their long robes, the red vultures standing tall with red paint on their faces, and servants lined up quietly by the walls. The air was tense. Even the candles burned slower, like they didn't want to be there. Prince Ekin sat on the throne, hands resting on his knees. His face looked calm, but his fingers were tight. His eyes scanned the room, stopping once in a while to look at faces he used to trust. Some of those faces now looked away. Ijay walked in, dressed in her full black armor. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just walked straight to her seat beside the prince like she owned it. Uzo stood behind her. That same calm face, that same proud smirk. He never said much, but Ekin could feel his presence like a sword pressed against his neck. Councillor Idu stood and cleared his throat. Today, we discussed the village tax increase and the movement of soldiers near the eastern wall. Ekin nodded. Let's begin. A nobleman rose. The farmers are angry. We are taking more food than they can afford to give. Before Ekin could answer, Ijay spoke. Then let them work harder. Her voice was sharp, loud. They have mouths to feed, the nobleman said. And we have a kingdom to defend, she replied, staring him down. Food can be grown again. A lost kingdom cannot. Ekin raised his hand gently. Ijay. She turned to him. What? Let me handle this. You've handled nothing since the day you wore that crown, she said. The room went quiet. You could hear the birds outside the window. Ekin stood up slowly. This is not the time for insults. She stepped forward. Then when, Your Highness, when will it be time to stop playing king and start acting like one? I said enough, he said louder now. Ijay didn't stop. She walked right up to him and, in one swift motion, raised her hand and slapped him across the face. Hard. The sound echoed across the court. Ekin stumbled back, holding his cheek. Blood dripped from his nose. No one moved. No one spoke. Ijay stared at him and said loudly, clearly, a king that cannot roar should kneel. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the room in complete silence. That night, the palace gates were lit with torches. 13 bodies were hanging from wooden beams. Their clothes were torn, their hands tied behind their backs. A wooden sign was nailed above them. Traitors to the crown. Among the bodies was a teenage boy named Chima. He used to polish Ekin's sandals. He wasn't even a soldier. Just a quiet boy who always greeted the prince with a smile. Ekin stood far from the gates, hidden in the shadows, looking at the bodies as the wind blew their feet gently. Adeobi stood beside him, tears in her eyes. He said nothing. She finally broke the silence. How long will you let her do this? I'm trying, he whispered. No, she snapped. You're waiting. There's a difference. I don't want more blood. Adeobi stepped in front of him. You're still trying to rule with a clean heart. But this place was born in blood. Either take the throne, or die watching her sit on it. Ekin looked at her. Her face was tired, bruised by truth and pain. He wanted to speak, to explain the war inside him. But he knew she was right. That same night, the secret room behind the library was full again. The map was spread out. Candlelight flickered over tired faces. Zubair was the first to speak. She's too bold now. That slap was a message. She wants the world to know he's weak, Kato said. I'm not weak, Ekin said softly. I'm just not like her. Then be something stronger, Okazi said. His voice was stronger now. His back straighter. We can't wait anymore. Adeobi looked at the map. We can use the North Tower. It's barely guarded now. We enter from the roof, through the old servant tunnels. No red vultures are posted there. Zubair nodded. We get inside. We take Uzo first. He's the head of the snake. Without him, Ijay loses her ears. Ekin nodded slowly. And we do it tomorrow night. In another part of the palace, Ijay sat in her private chamber. Uzo stood near the window. They are planning something, he said. They always are, Ijay replied. This time, They're moving fast. She smirked. Let them. When mice come out of hiding, it's easier to crush them. He turned to her. You slapped him in front of everyone. He won't forget that. I don't need him to forget, she said. I need him to break. The next evening, the moon hid behind thick clouds. Ekin wore black robes. No crown, no ring, no gold. Just a sword at his side and fire in his chest. He moved through the tunnels with Adeobi, Okazi, Kato, and Zubair. Each carried a weapon. Each step was quiet. The only sound was breathing and the distant beat of a war drum in their chests. They reached the servant staircase and climbed slowly. Adeobi opened a small panel at the top. They were inside the east wing now, near Uzo's room. Kato went first, sword in hand. They moved fast, quiet. They reached the door. Okazi raised 3 fingers. Then 2. Then 1. They kicked the door open. Uzo stood inside, shirtless, holding a scroll. His eyes widened. But before he could move, Kato grabbed him. Adeobi locked the door behind them. Zubair grabbed the scroll. It was a list. Names. Locations. Orders. All rebel camps, Zubair whispered. This is the proof. Uzo struggled, but Okazi held him tight. Take him to the tunnels, Ekin said. We'll make him speak. But outside the room, footsteps were coming. Lots of them. The red vultures, Adeobi said. We've been found, Okazi muttered. They ran. Down the hall. Through the staircase. Into the tunnel. Behind them, the sound of boots and swords filled the air. Faster! Ekin shouted. They reached the end of the tunnel, back to the library. They shut the door. Locked it. Breathing hard. But they had Uzo. And that changed everything. In the hidden chamber, Uzo sat tied to a chair. He didn't struggle now. Ekin stood before him. I trusted my wife, he said. She said you were family. Uzo chuckled. I am. Just not hers. Zubair held up the scroll. Tell us about the camps. Why should I? Ekin stepped forward. Because if you don't, I will send your head back to your people without your tongue. Uzo looked at him. The soft prince was gone. Now, there was fire. There are 4 camps, Uzo said. North of the forest. 50 men in each. They're waiting for my signal. What signal? The burning of the royal banner, he smiled. When that happens, they march. Ekin's jaw tightened. He nodded to Okazi. Keep him here. Don't let him eat. Don't let him sleep. Then he turned to the others. It's time to make Ajay feel fear. By morning, the palace buzzed with whispers. The red vultures searched every room. Uzo was missing. Ajay stood in the courtyard, her eyes scanning every face. She took him, Adeobi whispered to Ekin as they passed each other in the hallway. She knows it was you. Let her come, Ekin said. That night, the court was full again. Ajay walked in. Her face was stone. She didn't sit beside the prince. She walked to the center. And she said loudly, My cousin has been taken. The traitor is among us. Ekin stood. He's not your cousin. He's a rebel. Ajay looked at him. So now you grow teeth. I found the scroll. I saw the names. And what will you do with them? Ekin raised his voice. I will take back my kingdom. The court froze. Ajay's eyes narrowed. Then let the war begin. The sky above Ubero was clear. Not a single cloud. It was the kind of sky people prayed for during harvest season. But inside the palace, a storm was waiting. Prince Ekin stood in the great hall with a calm face. He wore a deep red robe lined with gold. His crown rested lightly on his head, not because he wanted it, but because he had to wear it tonight. Every corner of the palace was decorated. Red and gold cloths hung from pillars. Palm wine flowed in clay cups. Roasted goats lined the long table. Musicians played soft drums in the background. Laughter rose and fell like waves. But none of it was real. This was a trap. And Ekin knew it. 2 days earlier, He had stood before his secret group, Adeobi, General Okazi, Zubaya, and Kato. "I will act like I've lost," Ikon told them. "I will praise her in front of everyone. She will believe she's won. Then we strike." Zubaya raised a brow. "And if she doesn't fall for it?" Ikon looked at him. "Then I die a coward in silk. But I won't die silent." Okazi placed his hand on the prince's shoulder. "Then let's end this properly." They planned every step, every move. The wine, the meat, the dancers. Even the servants carrying the trays were handpicked. But the most important part was Uzo, the rebel, the snake in royal cloth. He was tied up in a cellar beneath the library, bruised, weak, angry. He had refused to speak after his confession. So Ikon left him for Adeobi and General Okazi. They didn't ask questions. They simply sharpened their knives. Now, in the hall, the show had started. Ijay walked in wearing a long dark robe, her head held high. The red vultures lined the walls like statues, their faces cold and unreadable. Everyone stood as she entered. Ikon stepped forward. He smiled. "Welcome," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "To a night of peace. To a new beginning." Ijay raised one eyebrow. "Peace?" "Yes," Ikon nodded. "I have come to understand that strength is not the enemy. Only fear is. And I am not afraid anymore." She said nothing. He held up a golden cup of palm wine. "Tonight, we celebrate the one who held this kingdom when I could not. The one who protected us. The one who deserves our respect." He turned to her. "Ijay, you are the true protector of the realm." The crowd gasped softly. Ijay looked around. People clapped. Some whispered. Then, for the first time in a long while, she smiled. Hours passed. The music grew louder. People danced. Servants moved quickly with meat, wine, fruits, and spicy stew. Ijay sat near the throne, laughing at something Uzo once told her. But now, he was missing. She hadn't seen him all evening. She told one of her guards to find him. "I'm sure he's just enjoying himself," she said, sipping her wine. But her fingers started drumming on the table. Beneath the feast, in the royal garden where the moonlight kissed the ground, Uzo crawled backward, blood on his shirt. Adeobi stepped forward, her blade dripping. General Okazi stood beside her, holding a deep cut across his arm, but still strong. Uzo spat. "You think killing me will stop this? The Dara Brotherhood lives in every corner of this land." Adeobi's voice was calm. "Then we'll find them too." She drove the knife deep into his chest. Uzo's mouth opened, then closed, forever. Back in the hall, Ijay started to notice things. One of the red vultures leaned against the wall, then slid down slowly. Another stumbled forward, grabbing his stomach. A third let out a low cry and collapsed. One by one, they began to fall. Some screamed. Some foamed at the mouth. The music stopped. "Poison," someone shouted. Ijay stood up. Her eyes went straight to Ikon. "You." Ikon stepped back. "I gave you a feast. You brought weapons." She screamed, drawing her sword. The crowd ran. Nobles fled. Dancers dropped their instruments and ducked under tables. But Ijay didn't run. She ran toward him. In the middle of the throne room, Ikon drew his blade. It was not polished. It was not pretty. But it was real. Steel met steel. The sound rang through the hall as they clashed. Ijay swung fast and hard. Ikon blocked, barely holding his ground. She came again, a wide slice aimed at his chest. He dodged, but her blade caught his side, tearing the cloth. He winced, but didn't fall. "You could have ruled beside me," he shouted. She growled. "No. You wanted a shield. I wanted a throne." They fought like fire and storm. Punches, blades, blood. She kicked him backward. He rolled and stood again. He threw a chair to distract her, then rushed in, cutting her arm. She screamed and knocked the blade from his hand. He fell. She stood over him, lifting her axe. Her mouth opened to speak. But before she could bring the blade down, a sharp twang filled the air. A crossbow bolt flew through the open window and struck her in the shoulder. She screamed and dropped the axe. She turned, eyes wide with shock. At the far window stood Queen Dowager O'Malliter, her crossbow still raised. She stepped into the hall calmly, guards behind her. "I made you both," she said. "Now I'll bury you both." Ijay fell to her knees, blood pouring from her shoulder. Eakin sat up, breathing hard, covered in sweat and dust. "You," he said, looking at his mother. She smiled faintly. "You were never ready. But now, maybe you are." Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe, so you won't miss when the next part drops. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.